Picture this. It's October 1973. Arab nations cut off oil to the United States. Within weeks, the price of oil quadruples, from $3 a barrel to nearly $12. Gas stations run dry. Americans wait 4, 5 hours in lines just to fill their tanks. The stock market loses 45% of its value. GDP contracts, a 4% global GDP shock triggered by nations sitting on sand. And out of that crisis, one of the most powerful financial systems in history was born. It's called the petrodollar. For 50 years, it's been America's secret weapon. The reason the US dollar makes up 60% of global foreign exchange reserves, even though the US is only 25% of the world's economy. That 35-point gap is the petrodollar. But right now, that weapon is cracking. Saudi Arabia is openly discussing oil sales outside the dollar. BRICS nations, representing 40% of the world's population, are building alternatives. And the Middle East is more unstable than it's been in 50 years. What's happening there today isn't just a regional conflict. It could be the beginning of the end of American financial dominance. And most people have no idea. Let's start from the beginning, because you need to understand what we're dealing with. After World War II, the world operated on something called the Bretton Woods system. Every major currency was tied to the US dollar, and the dollar was backed by gold, literally $35 per ounce. America held the gold. The world held dollars. Simple. But by the late 1960s, the US was spending billions on the Vietnam War and on domestic programs. They were printing more dollars than they had gold to back. Foreign governments, especially France, started noticing. They started sending dollars back to the US and demanding gold in return. In 1971, President Nixon did something that shocked the world. He simply ended it. No more gold backing. The dollar was now a fiat currency, free-floating, backed by nothing but trust, and trust without a foundation evaporates fast. The dollar began to slide. Inflation surged. The US needed a new anchor, something to create global demand for dollars, even without gold. Enter Henry Kissinger. In 1974, Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia. The deal he struck was elegant in its simplicity. The United States would provide Saudi Arabia with military protection, weapons, and a security guarantee against its enemies, including a rising, unstable Iran. In return, Saudi Arabia would do two things. 1. Price all of its oil exclusively in US dollars. 2. Take the profits from that oil and reinvest them into US Treasury bonds. By 1975, every member of OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, had agreed to the same terms. Overnight, the dollar had a new foundation. Not gold. Oil. Here's why this was so powerful. Think about it. Every country in the world needs oil. To buy oil, they first needed to buy dollars. That meant every nation on earth, from Germany to Japan to Brazil to India, had to hold reserves of US dollars. They had to earn them, trade for them, maintain them. This created a permanent, structural, global demand for the American dollar. And that demand gave the US something no other country in history has ever had: the ability to print money, run deficits, and borrow at low interest rates, because the whole world is essentially forced to buy your currency. Economists call this exorbitant privilege. And it's not an exaggeration. Because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, America can spend beyond its means. It can sanction enemies. It can cut countries off from the global financial system with a phone call. The dollar is America's sword, its shield, and its bank. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. For decades, the foundation of the petrodollar was a stable Middle East, or at least a Middle East where Saudi Arabia felt secure enough to honor the deal. That stability is now under serious threat. Let's look at what's been happening. Since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel and Israel's subsequent military campaign in Gaza, the entire region has been pulled into a state of escalating tension. Houthi rebels in Yemen, backed by Iran, have been launching missile and drone attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. At one point, over 50 major shipping companies rerouted their vessels away from the Suez Canal, adding weeks and thousands of miles to global trade routes. Iran and Israel have engaged in direct strikes on each other's territory for the first time in history. Lebanon's Hezbollah drew Israel into a second front. The region that sits on top of the world's most valuable commodity is more volatile than it's been in decades. And Saudi Arabia? Its relationship with the United States has quietly but dramatically shifted. The Saudi-US relationship was already under strain before the latest round of conflict. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, had grown frustrated with American criticism over human rights issues, including the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Saudi Arabia started charting a more independent foreign policy. Then came the bombshell that most Western media barely covered. In 2023, Saudi Arabia began openly discussing oil sales in currencies other than the US dollar. The Saudi finance minister confirmed they were open to trading in yuan, euros, and other currencies. This wasn't just a statement. This was a flare shot directly at the foundations of the petrodollar system. And Saudi Arabia isn't alone. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has been actively working to build an alternative to dollar-dominated trade. In 2023, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia were all invited to join an expanded BRICS. That bloc now represents over 37% of global GDP and nearly half the world's population. This isn't a fringe movement. This is a rival financial architecture being built in plain sight. Think about that for a moment. Saudi Arabia, America's key petrodollar partner for 50 years, sitting at the same table as Russia and China, discussing alternatives to the US dollar. Russia, cut off from the SWIFT banking system after its invasion of Ukraine, has been forced to conduct energy trade in yuan and other currencies. And it's working. China is now Russia's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade hitting a record $240 billion in 2025, almost entirely outside the dollar system. China has been building what's called the petro-yuan, a system where countries can buy Chinese oil futures on the Shanghai Exchange in yuan and convert those yuan to gold if they choose. Since its launch, Shanghai has grown to handle roughly 10% of global oil futures trading, and the Belt and Road Initiative has already funneled over $1 trillion into infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, quietly locking dozens of nations into yuan-based trade relationships. The message from Beijing is simple. You don't have to use the dollar. Use ours. We'll back it with trade, with infrastructure, and eventually with gold. Here's the question everyone should be asking, but very few are. What actually happens if the petrodollar system collapses? The short answer is, the United States can no longer spend the way it spends. Right now, the U.S. national debt is over $34 trillion. The reason the U.S. can carry that debt without imploding is that the rest of the world keeps buying U.S. Treasury bonds.
The U.S. federal budget is on an unsustainable path.
We're going to be broke really quickly unless we get serious about dealing with our spending issues.
Foreign governments currently hold over $7.6 trillion in U.S. Treasuries. They do that partly because they need dollars to buy oil. If that need disappears, if oil is priced in yuan or a basket of currencies, that demand dries up fast. When demand for dollars drops, the value of the dollar falls. When the dollar falls, inflation rises. Real, painful inflation on everyday goods. The Federal Reserve would have to raise interest rates sharply to defend the currency. And here's the brutal math. Every 1% rise in interest rates adds roughly $340 billion a year to what America owes on its debt. Do that 2 or 3 times over, and the numbers become unsurvivable. Already, the U.S. spends more on interest payments than on its entire defense budget, over $870 billion in 2025 alone. A weakened petrodollar makes that figure explode. In a worst-case scenario, you're looking at a collapse in American living standards, a loss of geopolitical leverage, and a fundamental restructuring of the global financial order. It doesn't happen overnight. It would be a slow bleed. But the trajectory matters. Now, to be clear, the petrodollar isn't dead. Not yet. The dollar still accounts for nearly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. Most oil is still priced in dollars. America still has the most powerful military in the world, and that matters. But the cracks are real. The alternatives are being built. And the Middle East, the birthplace of the petrodollar deal, is no longer the stable, U.S.-aligned region it once was. The Kissinger deal that held the world's financial architecture together for 50 years is being renegotiated, not at a table, but through missile strikes in the Red Sea, through yuan-denominated oil deals in Beijing, and through quiet conversations in Riyadh about what Saudi Arabia's future really looks like. America is not powerless, but it is at an inflection point. The question isn't whether the petrodollar system will be challenged. It already is. The question is whether the United States can adapt fast enough to build a new foundation for its financial power before the old one crumbles beneath it.